Life isn't perfect, and neither are we.
Nope. But we know how to face our fears
And have some fun.
and talk about all the messiest things of life.
Like the messiest things.
Get connected to yourself, get connected to others, and get connected to the life right in front of you.
This is The Connected Life with Justin and Abby.
That's me.
That's you.
And you.
So we're back here today with the Restoring Sexuality series. And we have a special guest on here.
Yeah, I'm so freaking excited.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite people. Over the years, he has become a really good friend that I just adore, love so much. And he actually is multifaceted in all the things that he does. But one of the things that he's done is he's created documentaries to really put a spotlight on sexuality inside of society, both including the trafficking of children and women, and also the change and the shifting of our culture into ways of sexuality that's really destructive. And so one of his first documentaries was Nefarious, which we interviewed him about that documentary. And then he did Liberated, the New Sexual Revolution. And most recently, he has a documentary that he's going to put out at some point. It may be a multiple part series or stuff. He's still working on that, but it's a documentary on pornography. And my friend Benji Nolot here is, I would say, an expert in some ways on this whole thing, because he's gone behind the scenes when it comes to pornography, especially, and behind the scenes in all these arenas where he's seeing the brokenness of humanity when it comes to sexuality.
And he's really a phenomenal communicator about this, which is one of the reasons I'm excited to have him on. We have a school here with thousands of students, and he is one of their favorite communicators about this because he's so passionate, and there is such a need to highlight what is going on in society and contrast it with what is good and true for us.
Yeah. So Benji, thank you so much for being willing to come on here again.
Thank you guys for having me. It's an honor. I always deeply enjoy coming up there and connecting with you guys, with the school up there, the students, and Justin, you and I have a really special connection because you're the one I always go to in my darkest moments in life.
That's true about a lot of people.
I'm feeling traumatized. So,
That's so kind of you to say.
It's the exact same for me. I go to him in all my traumatizing moments too.
She does. She gets free counseling. He married me for the consulting.
I married him to fix me. Just kidding. So would you give us just a kind of a recap of your story, how you got into the line of work that you're in and what it's kind of looked like?
Sure. Yeah. So just kind of going back a bit, I felt I grew up sheltered, the youngest of 4 kids. Had somewhat of an idyllic younger childhood. When I was 11, I saw a movie called The Accused that depicted the brutal, horrifying gang rape of a woman named Cheryl Arroyo. And the movie is about her gang rape and then her ensuing fight for justice. And but at 11 years old,
that's an intense movie for that age.
Yeah, I don't know how I saw it. It was like back in the day, they used to show there was 12 channels, and you'd hit one and be and they'd have stuff like that on there, and so anyways, that awakened me to the knowledge of the presence of evil in our world, and but it was knit to this idea of the injustice that women face uniquely. And and it's not that boys and men don't get raped, but the statistics bear out that the vast majority of rape victims are women. So in that sense, it is a somewhat gendered issue. Yeah. And I was basically raised by my 2 older sisters and my mom and my grandma. And so I had a very female influence in my life that I think uniquely allowed me to identify with the experiences of women in a way that our culture trains us as boys not to do, because to identify with the experiences of women is to share emotion, to express emotion, and that is considered to be gay or what
right.
or
in a derogatory way.
Yes.
You would be called gay slur, and that's a whole other issue of the socialization of boys. And so anyhow, so just saying that, I definitely experienced the toxic influences of our culture growing up. And, but part of my journey started at that young age, and that thread. And so later I found out about the issue of human trafficking and, millions of women being forced into lifestyles of systematic rape. And I think the trauma that I experienced in my body as an 11-year-old finally had a way to kind of come out. And it launched me into a season of like really receiving a burden and laboring with that burden in the place of prayer and travail. And then after about 9 months of that, I kind of like came up out of that season with a vision to really go after this issue of human trafficking and the unique injustice that predominantly women and children experience in our world related to human trafficking, prostitution, pornography, the scope of that whole thing. And your first documentary came out, it was probably that was before it was like a hot topic to me. Like it was one of the first. Now sex trafficking, it feels like it's more on the forefront. Like people have been pulling attention to it, which is so good.
Because that was back around 2011, which I think, wasn't it?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you really were probably one of the first people diving into this for us to be aware of.
It felt at the time in 2007 when we began that journey, it felt like there wasn't a manual on what was going on or how to fight it. And so we actually, it's kind of a funny side story. We thought we would make this, we would go on a 6-week trip. Mm-hmm. We would make the movie or film it and come back and edit it in a month. This is what we were telling our supporters. Like, it was like,
easy month.
September, we're like, this will be done in December, like that kind of thing. And we came back from that first 6-week trip, and for us, it was like, it was like head spinning because it didn't fit. What we experienced didn't fit into the narrow box that we had thought human trafficking was. And so it was after coming back, I literally sat in the prayer room for a month, feeling so defeated and discouraged and like processing, like, what do I even do with this? And like, we're not going to be able to deliver on the promises to our supporters. And I remember my editor called me over and he wanted me to show me a teaser trailer. And now at this point I'm thinking like, we don't like that was a disaster, like, and so I watched this. It was like a 1-minute teaser trailer and it was like the most epic teaser trailer for any movie I've ever seen. Like a Philip Glass like score. And it was just so epic. And I was like, wait, that was our footage? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, dang, I want to see that movie. And so I was like, okay, well, now we have to make it. We put the teaser trailer out. And we're like, this is coming out later this year. And we put another teaser trailer out every year for like years in a row. Like, it's coming out next year. Finally, by the time it came out, so many people had heard about it that like, they're like,
it was a really good publicity campaign.
Yeah. I wouldn't normally want to watch a movie about human trafficking, like drug trafficking, arms trafficking. Maybe I don't want to watch a film about human trafficking. Most people are like, oh, like give me the log line. But like, they had heard about it so much that we had a huge demand for it, and it was very grassroots. We got flooded with invitations to go screen it. At the first screening that I did, it was in Korea.
Wow.
Because somebody was like, hey, do you want to come speak in Korea? I was like, sure, I think my film's going to be done around that time, because I always thought it was going to be done around that time. It probably was. So I like brought it with me. We stayed up all night the night before, exported it onto a hard drive. I left on the plane.
Wow.
Like literally finished the export, got the hard drive, got on a plane.
Wow.
And I was like bordering on having an existential crisis. I thought like, I've just given the last 4 years of my life traveling the world to make this. What if these people don't like it? Like, what if it's terrible?
Oh yeah.
Like my heart, like it was, I think I would do much better dealing with something like that now, but then it was so intense. And afterwards it was over and I was just sitting there and I'm like, kind of like looking out the corner of my eye to my left and right. Like, I don't want to move. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. And the host who had organized the whole thing turns to me and he's got tears streaming down his face. That is the most powerful movie I have ever seen in my entire life. And I just started sobbing. I was like, oh, thank you, Jesus, that this wasn't a complete failure. And but then we got flooded with screening requests. We sent out teams all over the U.S. We got invitations to screen at governments around the world, speaking at the United Nations. It just completely blew up, and in a grassroots way, you know. And so that was a bit of how I kind of came into this whole issue.
Yeah. And then it continued to begin to develop. Now that put what started shaking inside of you? Because again, we're at a point now where you're getting closer to releasing your third film. Is that right? Are we closer, like this year, next year?
No. Yeah, it's actually been done for a year.
Wow.
So we're working out distribution. Distribution is the real pain in the butt.
Yeah.
And so so that's we are definitely releasing it this year. And
what is the third?
What's the name of that?
So the third one is Beyond Fantasy. That's the title. And I went kind of like undercover into the porn industry, and that film really unpacks kind of like what's going on inside the porn industry and really the human rights crisis side of this whole equation in porn, that deals with how it's being created and stuff like that.
Will you jump in and just tell us about that?
Yeah, before you do, like, what inside of Nefarious, was there something in the process of making that you went, oh my God, this goes so deep, we need to go create this over here? What was that?
Yeah. So let me just say quickly before I forget, for anybody that's listening or watching this, Nefarious Merchant of Souls is available now on YouTube. So it was available on Amazon and iTunes and DVD for the past, I don't know, like what has it been now? 9 years or so. And then in January, we released it on our Exodus Cry YouTube channel for free.
Love it.
So anybody can go and watch it for free, share it. Exodus Cry YouTube channel, Nefarious Merchant of Souls. So, basically when we would do these trips, I mean, we had these long plane rides, and then nobody had ever heard of us. So getting interviews was very difficult. Like just the whole process was very challenging, but I had lots of downtime, like where we'd be on a plane for 30 hours, or we'd get somewhere and we'd be, in layover for 12 hours, or we'd be in a city and I'd be sick for 7 days. Like I almost died in Bangkok. I wound up in a Bangkok hospital, but I was in a hospital in the hotel room for like 7 days, like in isolation by myself. And so I had like all this downtime, and so I was constantly writing and rewriting and studying, and during the process of that, I really got like a big picture understanding of all the various moving parts to human trafficking. And so it was really my own personal education, that journey and seminary into understanding trafficking and how it operates around the world, and the underpinnings of it and all of that. And so during that time, I began to get revelation about how pornography was interlinked with this, reality of trafficking. And so in 2010, we actually did some interviews with people in the porn industry, Ron Jeremy being one of them, and went to porn conventions and stuff. And but we didn't feel like that portion of it fit in the film. And so we released Nefarious. And then in 2012 is when we went back into pre-production to kind of pick up the pieces of the puzzle, so to speak, that didn't fit in Nefarious. And, we've talked internally at Exodus Cry for a long time about like, people will see Nefarious and they will get kind of like one piece of this. Then they'll see Liberated and they'll get a different piece. But like, it's going to take me, it's going to be my life's work to give the full mosaic of like this whole larger issue, because it's very difficult to include it all in one film. Yeah. So I think, anyways, there's a lot to say about that. But anyways, in 2012, we went back into pre-production. I called a meeting in my office between my co-producer, Morgan Perry, our director of Abolition, Lila Micklethwait, and we talked about going after this issue of pornography and now,
can you describe why? Are you going to tell us why it's such a big part of human trafficking? I didn't mean to jump. Okay, sorry. Keep going.
No, yeah, for sure. So just I'll wrap this up quick. Just a little bit of context. So we have this meeting, and to kind of like put the wiring together of like, where are we going with this? And we felt at that time like we really wanted to address the issue of pornography from the human rights side of the equation. So how pornography is getting made and the coercive landscape that is kind of the landscape or the wallpaper of the backdrop of how most pornography gets made. So I'll just kind of put a placeholder on that and get back to that piece, because that's where the kind of the trafficking connection comes in. But then we talked about we wanted to address this also from the public health side of the equation, the way in which pornography is affecting consumers, relationships, society.
Yeah.
And so it was really the public health and human rights side of how we wanted to go after it. So after that meeting, Lila went and basically read every single thing ever written on pornography. I went undercover into the porn industry, beginning to make this documentary. And then together we started working on a book called The Triple X Factor. That's also coming out this year. And
awesome.
And so that ended up being a 8-year journey. And then earlier this year, there was kind of a third equation that came in, which is the distribution side of pornography. And where my colleague Lila did some investigative journalist type work and really got kind of into the nuts and bolts of Pornhub's distribution model, which she discovered that they don't require age or consent verification. And so there's videos of trafficking victims on there that Pornhub is profiting from. There's ads on them and rape victims videos on there, and people are trying to get them taken down. They have a very difficult time getting them taken down. And it's this whole thing. So she wrote an op-ed in the Washington Examiner, which went viral. The next day, the BBC came out with an article, and then it like exploded to like more than 200 news outlets around the world, all citing Exodus Cry, Lila, like all this stuff. And then so we started a petition to hold Pornhub accountable for this and to change this system. And then the petition went viral, and that now has over 800,000 well over 800,000 signatures.
Awesome.
And it has been signed by people in 183 countries. And so that has gone global. And so really, like, it was like detonating a bomb, It was like, we did not anticipate that, because Lila, I mean, in our world, she's always writing like op-eds and circulating them, and like
totally.
And people don't pick them up, and then we publish them on our Exodus Cry blog. So Lila's like, I've got this op-ed, and internally we're like, that's awesome, Lila, but like that's not like it's gonna like go global. And then, I mean, if anybody is out there, I would recommend following my colleague Lila Mickleway on Twitter, because I mean, she is a firebrand that is really going after this and kind of spearheading this whole initiative against Pornhub. So it's these three components: the human rights, the public health, and then the distribution side.
Yep.
Could you go into each of those?
Yeah, sure. So I think in many respects, like just kind of like pulling out and like big picture, like, so there's like, prostitution and trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation. There's the larger commercial sex industry, right? Mm-hmm. And then that it's a system, in our view, an abolitionist critique. It's a system of gender inequality, violence, and exploitation. And it has like different manifestations, and pornography is a component of that. Escorting, all these different things are various components of it. But in many respects, I feel like pornography is almost like the central hub in a way. And it's because on one hand, pornography is feeding the demand for these other aspects of the sex industry. And the demand is really at the root of this. And it is a supply and demand issue.
Right.
Yeah.
Just to say it plainly, like if men stopped buying women and children for sex trafficking would end today. Right. And yet we're talking about that in a world in which most boys grow up having their sexuality hardwired through pornography.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
They are smart. Oh, sorry. You go ahead.
You go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, Foundationally inside of this, when you're inundated with pornography from a young age, it begins to train you and say, this is what life should be like. This is how relationship and sexuality should be. This is what I should want. This is what I should expect. And all of a sudden, that breeding ground becomes the initiation for someone to go, I'm going to go buy a woman. I'm going to go buy a child. I'm going to go get involved in this stuff over here. And so it creates that demand. And people are being groomed.
Yeah.
Young people are being groomed for years for this bigger thing that has this wake of slavery on the other side of it, really.
And that's what I was going to say. The porn industry is such a smart in campaigning, in the sense that they get people young, they hook them, and then it feeds the system of demand.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, that's exactly it. So pornography is really the centerpiece of all of this, and it's a big conversation to pull all that apart, and that's why Lila and I wrote this book, The Triple X Factor, which does a deep dive into how to understand pornography, its impact on us, and what we can do about it. It's the first solutions-based book written on pornography, and it's extremely comprehensive. So we go deep into neurology and deep into the sociology and deep into all these subjects. But for the sake of time and to simplify it in this podcast, the biopsychosocial development of boys and girls in a pornographic society creates has a neurological impact, biological impact, social impact. It's like it affects our psyche, our way of being in the world. And unfortunately, for the sake of time, I don't have time to go in and prove all of those points, but just to say it is having a profound impact on how we are being socialized, how we are being shaped into how we are in the world. And so for us, we see we see pornography as a very central hub in the whole larger picture of commercial sexual exploitation. And then so along with how pornography is impacting viewers is also how pornography is being made.
Yeah.
And stuff that Beyond Fantasy looks at is how is this being created? And I feel like that's a really important conversation from the standpoint that it removes the subject of pornography from the kind of moral debate about whether this is healthy for one's self or relationship or not, right? And that's where a lot of this gets framed. People will say, if you critique pornography, people will say, well, you're anti-porn. And there's a stigma with that. You just don't get it kind of thing. And kind of this cheeky notion that porn is kind of this erotic thing that can enhance relationships and stuff like that. So that's where a lot of the premise of this conversation happens. Well, I have a lot to say about that, but just to leave that there for a second, if you come over here to how it's being made, it becomes a different premise for a conversation. And the thing that I liken it to is the conversation around chocolate. There's people who say it's healthy. There's people who say it's not healthy. Some people say you should have a piece of dark chocolate a day. Other, health fanatics are like, no, that's, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So, but what most people don't realize is that the vast majority of chocolate from these major brands is being created by child slave labor. And so that brings it into a different category, because we can say collectively, okay, well, we might disagree about whether this is good for you or not, but we can all agree that it shouldn't be being made by child slave labor.
Right.
And so that's kind of the premise for a conversation about the human rights side of pornography. And so we went in and what we learned is that the vast majority of pornography is being made against a very coercive landscape. So I'll give you an example of that. I talked with a producer, and I was kind of hinting at these ideas of trafficking and connections and stuff like that. And he just flat out said to me, he's like, well, he goes, here's how I film a scene. He goes, I will call the talent and I'll tell them they're going to get paid X amount. And he goes, I do that very intentionally because I want them to spend the money in their head. Most of them are living in these model houses. They know that they are going to have to pay their driver. They're going to have to pay a fee to their agent. They have to pay a fee for the house that they're living in.
Right.
And then they, have to survive, and then they want certain things. And so let's say the amount is $1,000. By the time he goes, I tell them that intentionally because I want them to spend the money in their head before they get there. But I don't tell them what they're going to do. I just give a very vague picture of like some scene. Then they get there. Then they get into the scene. Halfway through is when I tell them what I really want. And he goes, and then at that point, I have the leverage of everybody else that's on the set.
Yeah.
Pressure that's on them, and the fact that they've already spent the money in their head. And now, instead of doing this to get that money, you have to do this to get that money. And so that is a form of coercion.
Right.
And which, human trafficking is defined by force, fraud, or coercion for commercial gain. And so, so in a very real sense, there are shades of trafficking all throughout the porn industry, and in many respects, very like substantive, concrete instances of trafficking going on inside the porn industry. And so, so for me, like that is a very important part of how we understand pornography. Like I said, because regardless of whether somebody may morally agree or disagree with this, if we understand that coercive landscape, that how so much of it is getting made, it's a different picture. And then the other thing that I would just say quickly on this point of how it's getting made are the individual stories of the people who are in pornography.
Yeah.
And we get a very two-dimensional perception of who's appearing in pornography through a screen,
right.
and or through their Twitter feed, but when you get behind that and you meet the actual people, what you discover is that these are not two-dimensional people, that these are three-dimensional human beings with experiences in life, with, that they're whole human beings. And that was a very, people used to say to me when I was like filming in the porn industry, like I had friends that say to me like, man, I don't know how you do that. Like,
thinking you'd get sucked into.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it was the exact opposite. I'm like, once you meet these people and you understand how this is getting made, there's nothing attractive about it at all. Like it's heartbreaking. And
did that even take you to a dark place? Like dark in the sense of emotionally overloaded and overwhelmed, having to participate in the background there?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, as a documentarian, like I'm sitting down with these people and trying to posture my heart with empathy to create a very an experience where we can be together in all of our humanity with each other for this period of time. Well, what's unique about that for them is that they're so used to people relating to them, both in the industry and when they go about as these hypersexualized beings, that it's weird. Like it has an effect on their psyche. And I remember Joe Rogan talking about this with kind of in the world of like comedy. He was talking about Andrew Dice Clay, how Andrew Dice Clay, when he was younger, he had a different name, and Andrew Dice Clay was one act that he did, but people liked it so much he kept doing it, and then he became the character.
Right.
And there's something about that where these people internalize that, those projections of you are a sex object, to a point where it does start to transform their identity, and so they relate out of that. And so many of my interactions at first were very awkward because they're like petting you, I'm like, and I'm just like in my own world. I'm like, and it was very odd, and like
you're like, what the hell is going on right now?
The kind of like social boundaries that most of us there's don't exist inside the porn industry, and they call themselves like an incestuous community. And I have a lot of love for the people in that community. Like I don't say that in judgment. Like it's a subculture of very broken people, but a lot of them are very talented and very beautiful, or very exceptional in some area, and but this is where they found themselves in life for whatever reason. And anyways, so I'd sit down and when I start to relate to them as people, what it does is it draws out of them their own humanity in a way that it puts stuff down. And so they have almost this subconscious experience of reclaiming their own dignity. And it was powerful because they would cross these personal thresholds and find themselves in these very these moments of personal epiphany. And so I would say most of the people that I did sit down interviews, I ended up leaving the porn industry shortly after.
Wow.
Because once you become in touch with your own humanity, again, it's the industry really destroys dignity. And so anyway,
would you say even what you just said feels like one of the ways, because I know this is one of the things that helped Justin in the area of porn, is his ability to stay connected to humanity. So Justin could stay connected to his humanity and women's humanity. So porn, he couldn't, he could still see them as real humans. And so you're talking about them seeing themselves as real humans, but have you also seen that as something that is helpful for people to overcome addictions to porn?
Yeah, absolutely. I think humanizing these individuals who, have been so objectified is a huge part of what helps us to overcome the impulse, to be gratified by the images of this, because it's just, our bodies are so complex, our brains, everything, the way that's wired, but this is it's a super potent form of content that is eliciting all kinds of things in our body. And so, in a very real sense, a young child that's exposed to this is literally neurologically overwhelmed, because the judgment center of the cortex of our brain isn't even fully developed until we're 25.
Right.
And that's the part of our brain that hits the brakes, when there's a red light, it's
right.
It's something. And so when that's not there, they're just they're literally neurologically overwhelmed. But then it also starts to form pathways in the brain over the habitual use of it. And then there's a connection and association with arousal, and also the dopamine rushes in the brain. So the pleasure center of our brain being lit up. And so a lot of people frame their struggle with pornography as a moral and a spiritual struggle, instead of a fantasy addiction and a neurological battle. And by that, a lot of Christians in particular fall into shame, and then shame has a ping pong.
It pulls you right back.
Addiction, because it's I feel bad, so I do bad, then I do bad, so I feel bad, and it's just back and forth. And so reframing the entire struggle for people is also a very helpful way of overcoming pornography addiction. And we talk a lot about this in the book. We have a whole half of the book is dedicated to this subject. And so there's a lot more to say about that. But just to kind of circle back around to Justin's point real quick. So the experience of sitting with these people, I have to open my heart. I have to be present to their humanity. And it's, for me, it's not even an act. It's this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. I actually, do care about these people that I'm sitting down with. And I'm not like a news anchor just trying to, and not say that some news anchors don't care, but I'm not trying to get a story. I am actually trying to connect with your humanity and understand you and your world. And so the offloading of the trauma of their own personal journeys onto me, I started to experience vicarious trauma as a result of that. And after the first kind of stage of filming that we did is the point at which I personally needed to start getting therapy, because I had to have a way to release the emotional decongestion that was happening inside of me. I would walk around all day just feeling like I could cry at any minute. And it was, it was very disruptive to my own personal well-being. And
just the secondhand trauma.
Just the secondhand trauma. And also the feeling of I don't want to share I don't want to live in a world with, like, some of the people that I interview were downright sociopaths and were literally out to destroy human people's lives. Like, I had one producer tell me.
Yeah, before you say that, I want to add to that and keep that story, because I know exactly what story you're going to say. Because inside of this, one of the biggest myths is that porn stars love what they do.
Yeah.
And they even believe it. I have watched documentaries where like, oh my God, I so love it. But they're living out of an alternative persona that has actually
had to adapt.
Their adaptive self is they're going, yeah, I love this. I'm totally into it. But when you invite someone back into their humanity, all of a sudden they go, oh no, this stuff is crazy. This shit is destroying me. I'm in so much pain. Like, you get to the true human voice behind it, and no one can actually do what they're doing without destroying or suffocating the true human voice or the true human experience that's happening. And on top of that, when I've watched documentaries with porn producers and directors, they make it look like, oh, we love our people and we're here for them and we're all this great community. But these mother effers who are running the show behind the scenes, they don't give a shit about the people that are in the environment often. They don't care. They want to dehumanize and destroy the people in front of them for their own profit and gain, like you're talking about. And this is, I know what you're about to say because it's this producer. And what I wanted to back up, let me see how to put this. There is a true heart of dehumanization from a producer and director standpoint inside of this. They are out to steal and take. And I'm not trying to shame or whatever these people. This is the reality of how they're stepping into this. And there's such a facade. They make it try to paint it as it's so good. And so you're going to even break that reality right now with, I know, the story you're going to share. I'm pretty sure. I
feel, I mean, I resonate with the emotion that you're even expressing right now, because there is kind of a existential rage like that comes from thinking about these super predators that are like completely dedicated to destroying human life. And there's some kind of almost paternal, fathering instinct. Like, we feel our connectedness as a human family. Like, I feel like you're my sister, you're my, and so there's this natural human instinct that rises up in us. And I just want to say that anger has been so helpful for me to be able to give place to anger as a part of this. And not to like live in that where it becomes toxic, but to allow myself to have those feelings, because
righteous anger, it is, that there is an injustice that is here.
Yeah, it is downright disturbing. And so I want to share this story about this producer, but I just want to say kind of like that to touch on a little bit of what you were saying, that our understanding of the sex industry and the experiences of people in it, like what I would refer to as like an abolitionist critique, is that regardless of how somebody got in to the industry, whether they, anytime I talk about human trafficking, people go, well, what about the college student that's just out making money the easy way to pay their, blah, 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 blah. Everybody uses that example of like, and everybody wants to find the example to let themselves off the hook, because we would rather
blame,
do that than deal with the shame of our own complicity as a society about allowing this to happen. And we would rather disown our own shame than accept the vulnerability of like, wow, I have participated in allowing this to happen, right? And so people come up with this excuse. Well, what I want to say is that regardless of how somebody got in that, all prostitution sex, whether it's in pornography, stripping, fill in the blank, any form of commercial sex, all happens on the basis of a lack of desire or inequality of desire, right? And so that's why payment takes place, right? It's so the prostitution is happening on the basis that this person does not desire sex with so-and-so, this person does, and so payment is made. Right. And so because we understand desire and sex as being inextricably linked, abolitionists reject the term sex work, because we do not believe that sex can be work, because we believe fundamentally that sex and desire are are intricately linked. And if desire is not part of that equation, then the people who experience the sex will experience it as a form of sexual abuse, regardless of whatever the cover narrative is that they have had to adopt in order to survive the experience of prostitution.
Right.
They experience it as a form of sexual abuse. And so two people come into a room, the guy and the girl. The guy puts the money on the table. He says, you can take the money and leave, or you can stay for the sex. 10 times out of 10, she's going to take the money and leave because she doesn't desire him or his fantasy or the guy after him. Right. And so then you just kind of like bear this out with me for a second. So then she goes into the sexual encounter or whatever, and now she's experiencing it as unwanted sex. So what she has to do in order to survive that is two things. A, she has to construct a cover narrative. And there are enough people who've been in the sex industry long enough that are all parroting the same thing. The sex industry gatekeepers saying how empowering it is, saying how sexually liberated it is, that the cover narrative is there for them. They're fed the cover narrative by their brothel owner, by their pimp, by the porn producer, or whatever. And so they adopt the cover narrative to delude themselves because, I mean,
it's the only way to survive. Right.
You psychologically have to do that. And like, and then the other thing is that they do is they have to dissociate. And so people told me survivors
you have to get out of your body if you are having someone take from you something that you don't desire.
In order to keep your humanity intact. And the irony of it is that you end up fracturing your humanity in the process. Everything that I'm saying to you has been informed by the movement of survivors, human trafficking survivors, prostitution survivors, pornography survivors. And that is really what has informed the abolition critique of the sex industry. But the people, they've told me, like, I won't allow somebody to kiss or touch my arm, and what they're doing is they're channeling their humanity into a part of their body that allows them to keep their humanity intact while they experience this debasing, humiliating, unwanted sexual experience, right? But over time, then that fractures their humanity. And it's a very cruel, I think the idea of pornography really embodies what the end of the world looks like, a world without empathy. The idea of prostitution is a human cruelty that is unimaginable. And so over time, the part of the cruelty of it is that the men or the pornographers are requiring these people to pretend like they enjoy it. And so, and they're rated on this. Like they have John forums where it's like, she was a good bang, but I could tell she didn't want it the whole time. So yada, yada, like, and versus the girl who,
can pretend better, who can disassociate better.
Can pretend better. And so you're having to do all these psychological gymnastics. Well, over time, it completely destroys your humanity. And that's why the vast majority of people in the sex industry experience PTSD.
Absolutely.
And so to just kind of tie it back to this story, so this porn producer tells me, he goes, I said, help me understand what you want to see happen on a set. And he goes, really what I was trying to do is get him, because these people have to get through life. And I will make this one disclaimer that not all porn producers are like this. And there are ones that are
more decent,
that I would consider like sociopaths, like over the edge. And there are others who are really believe that they're trying to do this in a, ethical way. And so there's and I'm talking about this one sociopath but he still has to get through life. He has to go get his gas. He has to go to the grocery store. And like, you can't like go get through life, like in that mindset. And so I wanted the porn producer to come out. Yes. I'm like, help me out. And you could see in the interview when his eyes change and it's like, suddenly he's in a different place. He's in that world. And he's like, when I'm on set, and he goes, and she is shivering and, shaking. And he goes, steamrolled, as we call it, completely broken. He goes, I just lay it on harder and I lay it on harder and I lay it on harder until they snap. until we find the end, until she's on a heap in the floor holding onto my leg and I'm pissing on her. He goes, that's the most beautiful thing in the world. Like, it's like people who have watched like Beyond Fan, it's like so mind blowing. And so coming out of a season of filming like that, I had this weird mixture of feeling the trauma of the people who've been victimized that I talked to, but also the despair and hopelessness and powerlessness of feeling like I just don't want to share this world with people like that.
Right.
And like I could not, it caused me to question my own existence. It's like I cannot reconcile this. I cannot wrap my mind around somebody who is intent on destroying another person's humanity. And but that really, really dark place helped informed my understanding of human sexuality, and specifically this category of sexuality that is what I refer to as a malevolent sexuality, and which is a sexuality that feeds on the destruction of other human beings. And so what this producer was describing is trying to do is he wants only brand new people, and he wants them to be overwhelmed in the context of the scene. And he wants that moment of them being overwhelmed to be captured on camera, because that is the heady wine to feed the sadist, malevolent sexuality of a lot of people out there who, like, lust devours innocence.
Yeah.
And they have become so consumed by a spirit of lust that they need to devour other people's innocence to feed that fire. And so it becomes the heady wine. And it was helpful for me even just to have that framework and almost like an archetypal sense, to just be able to get through my own feelings of despair and trauma but yeah, we're going down a rabbit hole here, but
this is good. This is something that needed to be painted. People need to understand the dehumanization process that exists inside of this space. That, like, we hear the idea that, like, when you're looking at that image, it's just an image. It's not really a person anymore. And you hear that and you're like, oh yeah, I guess, I don't know.
It's not that big of a deal.
It's not that big of a deal, or they like it or whatever. And then you have to start getting it. This is about a reality check. And this is a reality check that brings the weightiness, the weighty truth to what exists in that space.
And something that I like having you in this conversation, because you just told a story about a man breaking the soul of a woman, but you are a man who is literally facing this for the sake of protecting women. And I think that it's so important to actually, like, remember, one, that there are men, like, I know I'm married to one who fight for women's rights and who actively are engaged to make sure that women are protected and become who they're made to be. And it's not just an external thing, but they give their lives to the battle.
Yeah.
And I think it's also important as an invitation to men, because I'm listening to you and I can tell that there's something in you that burns for justice in this area. And I can hear that there's not condemnation, there's not judgment, but there's an understanding of right and wrong. And one of the things that's happening in society right now is there's a graying of what is right and what is wrong. And so now the lines are, well, this kind of porn is okay, and it's okay if your partner likes watching it with you, and it's okay if, like, and there's this blurring of what is right or wrong. And you are coming back saying, no. This is wrong, and we need people to stand up for righteousness.
And I'm gonna actually correct you on something, Abby, that I personally want to correct there.
Yeah.
You're using the word right or wrong, and I don't think that that's what we're having a conversation about. We're having a conversation about life or destruction.
Yeah.
And right now, what you're actually doing is saying, no, there's something so effing destructive about this. It isn't a question of this moral of like, oh, is this good or is this bad? I don't know. No, is this destructive? And is anyone in this equation being destroyed by this? And when we get down to it, the person behind the camera is being destroyed who's involved in it. The person who's partaking as a viewer is having destruction happen inside of their hearts, which we're going to get into in just a second with you talking about the effects on the viewer even more so inside of it. And I think to add to what Abby's saying here, because as we're having this dialogue, it's very easy for listeners to go, man, masculinity is really effed up. But this isn't an issue of masculinity. No. Masculinity isn't what destroyed these women. It happens to be people who are male perpetrators involved in this. But if you get behind what's really behind these people, it's hatred, right? It's hatred for women. It's hatred for self. It's self-hatred. It's fear of lack, shame. That is the driving force through these vehicles that in a lot of ways happen to be men. And the reason I'm making a distinction there is a lot of times we're looking for a villain for these issues. And it's easy for especially femininity to hear a story like this and go, yep, I knew men are not safe and they're villains. And actually what's not safe is the hatred and the self-hatred and the emotional craziness that's the driving force. And so when we can look at the right, when we can see what the real villain is, then we don't have to create utter separation between us and an entire people group. And so Abby's highlighting like, see, actually there are men, there's masculinity that is connected to love and not hatred, that is connected to care, that is connected to healing. And those are, and these heroic elements that want to fight on behalf of those that are underprivileged and feel trapped inside of their experience.
Yeah. And I wanted to say this, and I'm sure, Benji, you would agree, but like in communicating the horrors of it is not to shame people. You are a horrible human being. Because like you said earlier, shame doesn't get you out. But it is trying to wake people up, but then not go into shame to deal with it, but make different choices.
And I think that even if you're
if you're listening the rest of this whole series, we're going to talk about shame-free things and we're going to help you overcome your shame. And if you're feeling lots of shame, then just keep listening to all in the series, because we promise we're hitting shame so hard in this series.
Yeah. So even if some of you viewers, there are both men and women who are viewing pornography. It's actually a lot of women are viewing pornography nowadays, and I'm finding that in my office. But as you're listening to Benji tell the story of this, you may be having a shame attack. You may be like, oh my God, I'm horrible. I've totally partaken in this. I can't believe I have. And you're having an awakening to the reality of the heaviness or the weightiness of the pain that's involved in this. Part of that is that you have to begin right now to go, okay, that's the voice of shame. Because if there is no shame, then I can just go, oh yeah, there's something really destructive. I don't want to participate in destruction. That doesn't mean that I'm bad for this. It means I've been in partnership with destruction, and I want to remove myself out of participating in others' destruction and my own destruction.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you guys are saying a lot, and I'm tracking with all of it. I think it's all, this whole conversation, as I'm listening to you talk, I feel like it's so important, because the reality is that pornography is part of our world, whether we like it or not. It's part of our world, and it is touch every person's life.
Yes, everyone.
And we are living in a corporately sexually traumatized planet, and we are living in an environment in which, the things that are on mainstream television today are pornography. It's not. It is literally
commercial TV.
Into our world. And so what I hear Abby you saying is like, just kind of a lot of people are, sitting at home and wrestling with like, well, should I, shouldn't I? And like, well, maybe if we watch it in a positive context and it's, ethical porn, or, like there's like ways. And what I hear Justin saying is like reframing it around like, what is the cost? Just aside from like your beliefs about whether this is right or wrong, like what is the cost of the people to the people in it, to our society, to like, and I think that both are, a valuable way of looking at this. And, but ultimately I do think that it's really important, this thing that we've been talking about, for people to understand the way that porn's getting made. And even this idea of like ethical porn is such a ruse.
Right.
and disconnected from an important critique of what pornography is principally and fundamentally. And also, like, there was this, I don't know if I should go into the ethical porn thing right now, but there was this episode, Lila wrote a blog on it. It was a brilliant blog, but there was this episode in a series called, I don't even know if I want to say the series, but anyways, it was a series, and like one of these episodes, it was a docuseries, was supposed to be on like feminist porn. And you know, so it starts off and there's birds chirping, and it's like in the background, there's like, oh, I don't, you know, I do all this like ethical porn and blah, blah, blah. And by the end of it, like there was a scene where, you know, it's a documentary, so they're not showing the sex, but you can kind of see like they're showing the people's heads, and like you can kind of see like what's going on. It's like, okay, you're the producer, you know, the director who's like the ethical one is like, okay, you're gonna, you know, be at the piano, and then the guy's gonna come up behind you, and then like, you know, it's all gonna blah blah blah. And so like the scene's going on, and like the person's like, I'm in pain, and like I can't keep going, and the director's like, just fake it. And like the whole thing.
And that's what they were showing as ethical.
Yeah, and this was supposed to be like the ethical version, but I think it's fundamentally connected from an important like principle, like fundamental critique of what pornography even is. And so I feel like it would be good for me to touch on that, to offer people like an abolitionist critique of pornography. But I just wanted to say one thing on the shame piece before we do. I feel like I'm so in touch with my own humanity that it's hard for me to judge anybody else, because
absolutely.
So I don't I try not to carry myself about going around just like judging people, and like, but and I definitely, like, the Lord has brought me through some stuff, you know, of having compassion on men, because I was angry at men for a long time, to be honest. Like, I is one, but I'm mad at men. I'm like mad at my gender or my sex or whatever.
Yeah.
And like, so, but I'm in a different place today, and it's been a good journey. But I see. So I'm going to direct this towards our Christian listeners.
Okay, great.
That Christianity provides us with a sexual ethic that we understand that human sexuality is transcendent and has deep meaning and is, you know, a part of our lives in a way that is much deeper than just the biological pleasurable connection. And yet I consistently see people who identify as Christians boldly proclaiming their lifestyle as people like proclaiming their hookup lifestyle as something to be proud of, and like that all we need to get rid of is just the shame. And so I want to make a statement about shame, is that I think like to be shameless is to be bold and arrogant in what the Bible would describe as sin. And that's not good.
Yeah.
Like, shame can be a gift to tell us that sin's not fun. But to be shame-free is to be humbled by redemption and confident in righteousness. And so I think the conversation around shame is very nuanced. Like, and I don't want people to like live under shame, and the kind of shame that says like, you are bad.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. And that's how we would define
it's almost
shame.
the difference between guilt and shame. Guilt says, hey, there is something.
I did something wrong.
There is something destructive here. There is something wrong.
Right.
But shame says, I am something wrong.
But there's this shamelessness that I'm seeing more and more of, that I think is, it's like
people are throwing out morality to get rid of shame.
People are insulating themselves in compromise by crying religion every time they feel conviction.
Yes. And
then using this shame thing to basically free themselves from any kind of like moral or ethical standard.
Absolutely.
And that's not healthy. That is not healthy. And so there's kind of like two sides,
so good,
you know, to
Benji.
this of like the shamelessness that is like arrogance in sin. You know, I mean, like, even sin is a controversial word, you know, but it is a thing. Like, you know, that like the Bible has like standards of how, you know, we're called to live our lives and how we're to relate to each other. I mean, the Apostle Paul comes on so strong about sexually defrauding each other he appeals to the wrath of God. He's like, you know, and so like some of Justin's anger that I've been feeling in this podcast, I'm like, there's a righteous anger towards actually defrauding people.
Yes.
Yeah. But then there's the other side of it that people are genuinely struggling. Like, I don't want this in my life. And like, I have to get free from it. And that group is like what I think we're talking about when we talk about like, we don't want you to live under shame. Yeah.
Exactly. Because the people, we would like people to catch that there is something wrong with it if they have no morality and they've let go that it matters. But there are a huge group of people that are, I don't want to be doing this. I am trapped in this. I don't know how to get out. And we're wanting them to be awakened, but not like driven down in the mud by that.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
We wanted to spark hope. So, how does it affect people on the other side of those that
watchers,
view, the watchers, the viewers? What have you perceived?
So I want to just say, I want to just make a mention of how we should understand pornography, because I feel like that shapes the way that we either, you know, the kind of like this idea like centered around sexualized media is oftentimes, especially like in Christian circles and in the church, is oftentimes framed around like, you know, do it or don't do it, you know, like just don't watch that, or like, and part of, I think, what we have to come to terms with in our society today is that we are going to be exposed to things. And that's not necessarily always a bad thing. Like, if we have if we have like media literacy, if we understand how to interpret and deconstruct the images that we're seeing, so that we can develop a critique about what we're seeing. And it does two things. It frees us from becoming enslaved by those images, right? Those images are oftentimes seeded with like they're a minefield, and they have all kinds of hooks in them, and so they're meant to pull people in. Like the entire sex industry is predicated on capturing the lustful male gaze, and that extends out to our entire society. And I mean, just go on Instagram, you know, like for like 5 seconds, like the entire society is consumed in capturing the lustful male gaze. And so I think it's very important for us to develop a media literacy about sexualized content, to be freed from those traps and those snares, and then also, in a sense, to be a prophetic voice, to be able to critique what is out there in a way that is able to help set others free, and hopefully begin to turn the tide and change the story that we've been telling.
I'm so sorry, I'm going to interrupt you, but part of media literacy, what it's doing is it's bringing the blood in your brain back to the executive order in your brain, which is bringing the blood to the logic, not to the emotional center. So when you're watching images, you are getting pulled into the emotional, the amygdala, the center of your brain that is triggering just feelings. And then when you actually sit and process, what is it that we're watching? What are they trying to say? What are they trying to communicate? What is like when you begin to talk about it logically, it actually brings the blood flow in your brain to your logic center, which enables you to process the information differently.
That's absolutely, that's a great explanation.
So do you have like an example of questions you ask for media literacy, or like what kinds of conversations you have with your family when you're watching a show? Yeah,
I mean, let me just, is it okay if I just jump in and kind of share that? And so I think the way to understand pornography, first of all, is, and the entire sex industry, is that this is a manifestation of a sickness in our society, not a sign of its progress. So there is, again, this cover narrative that says like, this is about the progress of our sexuality, and, you know, we're just getting more in touch with ourselves and all this. And it's a complete lie. It is a manifestation of a sickness in our society, and the utter widespread desacralization of human sexuality to a point of sexual nihilism. And that's not helpful to society. It's not helpful to our relationships. It's not helpful to us as individuals. But But when we think about pornography, the way that I like to talk about it in terms of providing a framework is, I feel like, and really, like, for me, like, this is having spent time with producers and so on and so forth. It's getting into the mindset of, like, what is the producer trying to do here and trying to accomplish? And so the entire porn universe, I'm just going to use that term for a second, is predicated on casting two characters, the porn man and the porn woman. And these two characters become avatars for people to vicariously enter the porn universe. Yeah. And these two characters are crafted, and this entire universe is crafted with intentionality, because they're trying to exploit certain vulnerabilities in us as humans, right? That would draw us into this and then keep us coming back to it. And so, but the thing to say is that the porn man and the porn woman are both have their humanity completely stripped from them. They are, the porn man and the porn woman are completely expunged of all, their humanity is extinguished. They are emptied, so where they are hollow shells of a human being. And the porn man is characterized in the porn universe as having all power. And that is very intoxicating to the majority of men out there who feel powerless in so many places in their life. So they experienced rejection from women in so many spheres at so many stages of life, right? From, the cheerleader in junior high school to the teacher that he had a crush on in high, to the cheerleader in junior high, to the teacher he had a crush on in high school, to the, secretary in the office building, when he was in his profession, like, fill in the blank. Like, men, like, when I was talking to John Eldridge about this whole subject matter, I was like, so what is it that, you think that men need to do? And I was like, to become like better men, and I was expecting him to give like some charge, like, we men need to like get it together,
Right.
And he was like, men need to forgive women.
Yes.
I was like, what? It like really threw me off. And like, because men have, and it's not that women have inherently done anything wrong. It's that men have experienced rejection or this or that. And so, but these experiences, especially related to women and in the vulnerability of our sexuality, have made many men feel powerless. And so the porn man is all powerful. So now I, the viewer at home, can enter the porn universe through the avatar of the porn man. I can go into a world where I can get the high school teacher. I can get the junior high cheerleader. I can get the office secretary. I mean, pornography has sexualized literally every single
type of person,
type of woman in the world. Like, I don't know if there's an example, like nuns. I mean, fill in the blank, right? And so, so it becomes an extremely intoxicating experience. Now, here's where it becomes like really important. So the porn man, he's stripped of his humanity, and he essentially becomes a life support system for his erect phallus, right? So he exists to subjugate, penetrate, and degrade women, and to invoke and to punish them, and like the level of violence in pornography is so intense. So I often talk about pornography, like pornography invokes women's suffering to feed the male ego. The woman is stripped of her humanity. And what that looks like is that she has no preference. She has none of her own desires. She exists for one reason and one reason only: to be penetrated in every orifice of her body. And I hate even saying those words. And so like I'm like, sorry for being graphic, but
it's true.
That is the reality of the universe that the pornographer has created. She exists to be penetrated. He exists to penetrate her. And then she also exists to accept and enjoy every level of violence and sexual degradation that is perpetrated against her. And I am going to withhold graphic descriptions, but it is the worst kinds of degradation and dehumanization of women in pornography. So the reason I'm setting this up as a kind of framework to understand pornography is for the person who's listening to this, or the potential the potential porn consumer to have a framework to understand the world that they're going into, how that world has been set up, how they are being set up to experience that world.
Yes.
Because you can't consume pornography without eventually beginning to internalize and adopt
those
the very
ideas,
misogynistic, sexist, destructive, violent worldview
Yes.
that is embedded in pornography.
Right. It's like the more you eat of that, you actually, those flavors begin to paint your worldview.
Exactly.
And I want to add, can I add to that?
Yeah, jump in. Yeah.
I have noticed even a massive rise in the violence against women. When I talk to women about the sexual experiences that they're having with men, because men have now adopted the violence that they see inside of it. Now they want to act that out inside of the sexual space, but then that even transcends because they're being trained to take, right? Selfishly take, abuse, penetrate, as you say. And it goes from sexuality, and it goes to how we begin to emotionally relate and interact with the world around us. We start
I'm here
being
to
trained,
get my needs met.
I'm here to get and take from you.
And not I'm here to give.
I don't care about what you need. I don't believe that you have any needs inside of your human experience. Only I do.
Well, and I want to say this too, because there's a couple groups I think that are left out, because the same archetypes are happening if you look at guy on guy porn and girl on girl porn. There's still, all of it is taking humanity out. Because I know that a lot of my clients are into that world too. And so it's not just male versus female, because you do male on male and there's the same degradation. They're showing the same thing. There is a powerful one and a submissive one. And there are these themes inside of it. And I know a lot of women look at porn too. And one of the reasons that you're saying it's so destructive is it begins to just subconsciously creates a narrative for men and women without them knowing that it's creating it. They're watching it and they're thinking, I'm just watching this thing. They don't know that it is informing ways that they look at and experience and the emotions they have about life in other situations.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the term narrative. That's often how we talk about this. And part of what we develop in this book, the Triple X Factor, is we talk about, like, what is the story that pornography is telling about men, about women, about sex, and really kind of like unpack that narrative. And you're right, there's like these other genres. So I'm speaking to the larger kind of world of predominantly heterosexual pornography, which is the largest kind of embodiment of pornography, and the way in which men and women are cast in that world. Yeah. But then there's like subcultures and fringes and like, but all of it, even regardless if it's girl on girl, man on man, all of it is happening on a basis of dehumanization.
Yes, absolutely.
But the thing for the viewer at home is that, so I wanted to provide just a little bit of a lens and a framework for how we should understand pornography, because we do need to take it back to the viewer at home. And here's the thing to understand is like that, you know, we all, I think the first thing, how should I say this? Like, we all imagine ourselves, you know, to be in control of our lives, and I think that it's this issue of our sexuality is something that we need to think about, like, with a measure of humility. Our human sexuality is such a potent part of who we are as humans, and our sexual serenity is so easily disrupted, and so we are such, you know, sexually fragile human beings. I mean, mostly sex is talked about like it's used to sell shows and it's used to sell products, and it's like the more you do, the better. And it's like, and that's great, that's wonderful. There is an aspect of human sexuality that is great and powerful and can be healthy, but we don't often talk about the way in which sexuality can be destructive. I personally don't think there is anything greater in our existence as humans that can disrupt and derail our lives than our sexuality.
Absolutely.
I mean, it is a dark agenda against humanity that, I mean, you see the way children are targeted, right? Like a child that is targeted. And I saw a man in his 50s write a poem recently on YouTube about this, of his own personal experience with sexual abuse that derailed his entire life. And I mean, we've all heard, right? And so our sexuality is fragile. And the thing I want to say is like that when you come into this universe, the porn universe, when you click that button, like it's different. You are entering into a universe that is embedded with these, that is destructive with these destructive narrative and all the potency that goes with that. And the thing that I want to say for the viewer is like that you do not know where that is going to take you. And I say that with the most I can't exaggerate how important it is for us to understand. I'm talking to myself. I'm talking to the viewers that are listening to this. Like, this point is so important to understand because I have sat across from pedophiles who were on their way to prison for child pornography. And I go, like, were you a pathological pedophile? No, absolutely not. Like, I was a healthy fireman that was, had a successful life and but I hit the button and I didn't know where that button would take me. And it took me here, and then it took me here, and then it took me here, and then it took me here. I have chased down pedophiles in the other side of the world who didn't wake up one day and said, I'm going to go fly to Cambodia to go buy a child for sex. Like, there was something that happened, a trajectory. Right. And so the thing that all of us need to be so humble about related to our sexuality is we don't know the ride that we are going to be taken on when you push that button. So you think, well, what's a little girl on girl action, and I'm just kind of curious. And like, okay, well, I've talked to plenty of women who started there and it spun out their entire life. Like, where that took their sexuality. Yes. When I say where it takes you, I'm talking about the desires that are formed and shaped inside of that become so powerful that you are almost powerless to resist acting out on them. And so, it inevitably involves like some level of one's own degradation or the degradation of another, or some violation of one's own sexuality, humanity, or the violation of another in some way, shape, or form. And I've toured kink. I've stared the brokenness of this issue in the face in so many different contexts. And so my one strong thing is like, for anybody out there that's listening to this, is like, we have to be humble about our sexuality. Yes. We have to understand, like, no matter what we think about all of our self-help and how great we are and how empowered and I eat vegan and blah, blah, but set all that aside. Like, you don't have control over this. You hit that button and you are going to be taken on a ride that you do not know where it will end up. Yeah. And I know this is coming across as preachy, but I feel so much passion about it because I've held the pajamas, the bloodstained pajamas of a 7-year-old child. Like, I know where this thing ends up. And so it's just something that we all have to be so conscious and aware of, is like, we enter that world, we're entering that universe, and it has the capacity and the potential to take us on a ride where if I'm heterosexual, maybe I start having same sexual desires, or if I'm same sex, maybe I'm desiring a kid, or, it just, you don't know. Your sexuality is the last place you ever want to be taken for a ride. And so I just feel that really, really strongly related to this whole subject matter.
Benji, I want to add something from that I missed out on sharing just a little bit earlier, to add to a point that you made before we kind of get towards wrapping things up. One of the things you talked about was how men, they're angry at women, and they're angry about the women who rejected them and stuff. And one of my personal perceptions that I've made along the journey is that I feel like there's this element of society where when fathers got removed out of the homes, mothers are left raising their children and their boys. And so you have a couple generations of men who are raised by moms, and they're looking to find their masculinity and find out how, like, who am I as a man? Tell me who I am as a man. And they begin at a young age because dad's not there, and they go, all right, so tell me. And so mom's trying to teach their son, all right, this is what it is to be a man. But these guys feel unprepared because what they really needed was dad. And something unconsciously forms inside of the male experience where we're like, I didn't get what I needed. You couldn't provide that for me. I'm angry with you. Why can't you validate me? Why can't you validate my masculinity? And you watch as it evolves into sexual exploits with even women at a young age. And they keep doing that thing. Well, okay, are you going to say I'm a man? Are you going to say I'm a man? And over again, they're not being led to their answer. They're not having that masculine initiation and affirmation that really is able to settle them. And so now there becomes this war with femininity. And men are going, you failed me. You failed at validating my masculinity. I hate you and I want to obliterate you. And it's either that end of the spectrum, or it's the end of the powerlessness that they felt at the hands of their mothers. And I'm addressing that segment of men where they felt pain with their moms. They felt dominated and ran over. And that was so painful. They didn't know what to do with it. And so they channel it through these experiences where they feel this sudden power over women inside of their pornographic viewing. And so I just wanted to point some of that out, because some of you men out there, as you even hear this, might have to go, whoa, where did I learn about becoming a man? Where did I get that? Did I not get that? Did I try and get that out of my mom? Have I been trying to get that masculine affirmation from all these women that I've been sleeping with, and they don't have the capacity to give me that because that was never their role in my life? I actually needed healthy male figures that could speak into my journey and affirm me. And not just healthy male figures. I think it transcends into a relationship with our Creator, where ultimately we hear that from our own Creator. But I think inside of that exploration even may start breaking some of you men free as you begin to go, all right, what is it going to look like for me to let go, to forgive women? Because you talked about the element of forgiving women. And I think at one point, and do I need to forgive my mom? Do I need to forgive these women that I've been trying to get something out of, but that they can't give me? And do I need to release them off the hook and say, I release you? You were never supposed to be my source of identity. You were never supposed to be my source of masculinity. I am so sorry. And my validation, I'm so sorry I took this all out on you. I'm sorry that I've been angry with you ever since. I'm sorry that I've been trying to dominate you and get something from you ever since. And begin to own that inside of our masculinity, and then begin to go, all right, now how am I going to get this healthy affirmation from a higher source, or from healthy masculinity? And what does healthy masculinity look like? I think that's just a side note that I really wanted to inject to our listeners out there.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. And I had something great to say and it flew out because then I got
that's really good.
Lost in what you're saying.
It's really good.
One thing I did, probably the last thing I just wanted to ask you, Benji, I think this is such a, well, there's two, oh, here, I remember what I was going to say. It came back. I can tell that some of you are going to be listening to this and you're going to feel stirred, like, I need to get involved in this. Like, I need to be a part of, like, I need to be an abolitionist on this. I need to stand up for this. And so what are ways that people could get involved or do things if they're feeling stirred after listening to this?
The low-hanging fruit right now, the thing that we're really inviting people to partner with us in is this Pornhub campaign. And so if you can check out traffickinghub.com, our website that is kind of the face of this campaign, and sign the petition, that would be awesome.
Shine and spread it. Share it, make your friends sign it.
Yeah. And then on our website at exoduscry.com, the experience of going on to Exodus Cry really guides one through, like, what does it, look like to become an abolitionist? And for the people that are really wanting to dive deeper into that, we recently, redid our website, and I encourage people to check us out at exoduscry.com. And there's a whole path that it will take you on related to that. But Yeah, I mean, I think that there are, a lot of people that are waking up to this injustice and the realities of the harm of the sex industry in our world, and we feel for our part like we want to create on-ramps for them to partner with us and bringing about change related to that. And they can, find out more about that on our website. So.
Can they get on the email list so that they'll be notified when your next book comes out that you've talked about?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, people sign up for our mailing list. We give updates, and so we have our Exodus Cry YouTube channel, our Magic Lantern Pictures YouTube channel. We're releasing new content on both of those channels, video content every week. People can subscribe there to get that, follow us on Instagram and get on our mailing list. And we're constantly updating on various campaigns that we have going on and movies that we're releasing, short films and feature length, and all kinds of stuff. So it's a lot to kind of spell out at this stage of our conversation.
That's a great place to start.
Pretty self-explanatory and a very easy kind of like user-friendly experience.
Is there any, just before we wrap up, is there any quick things that you have to say about retraining your neurology? Like just a couple things that you guys have researched as helpful in retraining your neurology.
Yeah, I mean, I think on the hopeful side of this conversation is that we, by virtue of the fact that our brains can be wired, they can be rewired,
which is awesome.
And so there's tons of research out there showing like how quickly the body will restore itself when you begin to disconnect from that world of pornography that's stimulating and firing up those parts of the brain that have created these pathways. One thing I think that's really helpful, and I touched on this a little bit earlier, I think for the consumer, as a person has kind of this fresh awakening, if you will, where they really get to a point where they want to break agreement with pornography and stop pornography consumption. I think understanding this as a fantasy addiction and a neurological battle. And so a person may feel a surge of hopelessness or a disappointment or anxiety or I don't know what the trigger is, but we're all triggered by something different. And when the brain rewires itself, the pleasure center of the brain wires itself around a pornography, the instinct, the compulsion is to go there to experience pleasure. But what it becomes is a way of escape from dealing with, whatever's underneath that powerlessness or that anxiety or whatever. And the larger consumer culture that we live in is a very addicted culture. We have all kinds of addictive outlets, from entertainment to shopping to food to pornography. But pornography, I think, is one of the most powerful for a lot of reasons. But so we end up going to pornography to escape into a fantasy world. And so understanding that is important as a viewer, because now I can be armed when anxiety comes up, when the feeling of disappointment or discouragement or powerlessness comes up. I can be armed with an understanding of what's happening here.
Right.
And the way, and I'll just give this one little nugget, because again, we wrote an entire book on this.
Totally.
But so the thing is to disrupt the fantasy with truth and redirect that energy into something playful, constructive, that is also pleasure giving in a healthy way. Right? So I disrupt the fantasy. How do I do that? I go, okay, this is selling me an idea that this person likes this, enjoys this, deserves this, and is making money off this. The truth is that this person is enslaved with chains that I cannot see, with a past history of abuse that I do not know, with passions and desires that are being extinguished in their humanity that I know nothing about. And I feed myself with that truth. I go watch, Beyond Fantasy when it comes out, whatever it is that I feed myself with that truth to burst the bubble, the balloon of the fantasy, of that lie. Right? And then I redirect. So I disrupt and then I redirect. I redirect that compulsion towards pornography into going and doing exercise, going to the beach and surfing, going and taking a walk in, whatever it is, like something where I can get out, I can be playful, I can engage my body. But it's a healthy outlet. So here's what happens. If you do that, if you start the process and the pattern of disrupting and redirecting, what happens is then your brain
starts to rewire.
Begins to rewire itself. Do this for 30 days. And what will happen is that when that impulse comes, now the pornography that was the dominant seduction in that moment will be the secondary seduction. And the dominant seduction will be something that's actually very healthy. It will be to go work out. Right. It will be to go take that, trip to the beach. It will be whatever the thing is that you have, determined as the thing that you want to go to. And so the brain, what's happening is the brain is rewiring itself. The brain is becoming healthy again. And so we have the power over our bodies and to retrain our neurology and all this. And so I think for me, like that's that framework, and then those, two things to arm ourselves with are helpful. I've walked alongside men who have been on their recovery from porn, who have attested that this is an extremely helpful way to begin to deal with, this compulsive, addictive thing with pornography.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say I've worked with men and women who both have had porn addictions, and I've seen them be able to get and live free, whole lives where they are able to walk and be restored and have the parts of their humanity that were ripped away or broken or disassociated come back to them. And even when you're talking to him, like, I'm so excited about this series because we've already recorded some of the other episodes, and we actually talk about the triggers that happen that bring people to that, and learning how to have good emotional coping skills so that you can actually face anxiety or fear and heal so that you actually don't even have to disrupt. But also, disrupting is so important. And what you said is so huge. You can retrain your brain. I know this is true because I did it not with pornography, but with suicide, the fantasy of suicide. In my life, I thought about all the time, anytime something was painful, I just immediately went to wanting to die. And I thought that hundreds of times. And it took me exactly the process that Benji's talking about, disrupting the cycle. The brain just naturally, subconsciously is going to what it's always gone to, but you can redirect it. And the more that I redirected it, it began to where that is not the pathway anymore. Yeah. And so we've seen it. I mean, I've seen that in my own life. This is the basis of what we help people with in all of our lives, which is your brain can change. Wholeness is possible for anyone out there. And so I just wanted to end this on a note that if you're listening and you're in it and you want out, don't lose heart. Don't lose hope. Keep going. I think write out exactly what Benji talked about. It's a great plan. Keep listening to this series. We're going to give you as many different answers and roadmaps. We have so many different people sharing their stories of how they got free to inspire you. And what Benji ultimately was talking about when he talked about retraining your brain and going to these other avenues of pleasure, what he's talking about in the idea of pleasure is connection. They're connection points to ourselves, even when he's like, go on a walk, go on a hike, go experiencing these things, go connect with some people. Like, it's a form of connection. We're going to go dive deeper into the aspects of human connection further on in this series as we go. That's going to help show you how to engage that element of what Benji's talking about. And so, but I do like that he said play. We talk about that in another episode, that a lot of us adults get too serious, and then we try to fight negative emotions with seriousness, and then there's no release, and so then porn is the only release. And so actually playing and engaging joy and fun is a great, it's a missing part of humanity. Benji, I think you are absolutely incredible. I love hearing what you have to say. Your life is so hopeful. I know that you've paid a price for what you know. Like, I know there's like just the few stories that you shared. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to throw up. But for you to carry seeing all of that and to still stay tender to humanity and to still stay tender and be willing to walk this out. It's a beautiful gift to us humans to have a leader who is leading the way in this and paying the price to help awaken people all around the world. And I'm so thankful for you. And I am just praying for everybody who hears this, that they would feel awakened by this conversation.
Yeah. So I love you, Benji.
The feelings are definitely mutual. You guys have, been a lifeline for me and at times, and just really appreciate, you guys creating a platform for conversations like this. It's so important. So, I wish you guys the best with the rest of this series, and love to do it again sometime. So thank you guys so much.
Thanks, big man.
Appreciate you.
Bye now.